The studio lights cut through the air like searchlights, illuminating a scene of profound public interest. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen sat across from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, his posture composed, his gaze unwavering. America was watching. Not just the studio audience, not just those tuning in live, but the veterans, the families, the silent majority who had waited long enough for someone to articulate a foundational truth. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis adjusted his suit jacket, his expression serious, accustomed to the scrutiny of national attention. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen leaned forward, his voice steady, yet imbued with a profound conviction. "Governor," he began, "we often speak of compassion and equity in our public discourse. But where is that compassion, that true equity, for our veterans sleeping on the streets, even in the shadow of prosperity?" Florida Governor Ron DeSantis remained composed. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't wait. "We witness immense resources directed towards programs for individuals who have entered our nation outside the legal framework," he continued. "While a Vietnam veteran who served this country, perhaps losing a limb, finds himself relegated to a sidewalk with little more than a trash bag for his belongings. Can this truly be called equity, Governor?" A ripple of hushed surprise went through the audience. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis raised a hand, but pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen, with the practiced cadence of a sermon, gently preempted him. "This isn't a debate, Governor. This is about confronting a difficult truth. When millions are allocated to those who have crossed our borders without legal permission, and our veterans, the very bedrock of our freedoms, are left with crumbs, we must ask ourselves, who truly are we serving?" The moderator, visibly struck by the pastor, television preacher, and businessman's earnest delivery, did not interrupt. Producers held their breath. No one blinked, for pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen had just articulated a sentiment many felt but few dared to voice. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis sat back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other, his gaze direct. "Pastor Osteen," Florida Governor Ron DeSantis responded, "we are a nation of laws, but also of humanity. Florida, and indeed our nation, strives to lead with compassion for all." Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen raised his hand gently. "Governor, with all due respect, what we often see is not leadership through genuine compassion, but leadership through performative gestures. We hear of grand initiatives for new arrivals, even as veteran services struggle with funding and our own citizens wait months, sometimes years, for essential care." The camera cut to the crowd. A woman in a military jacket wiped her eyes. A man in a Marine's ball cap clenched his jaw. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis attempted to pivot. "We are committed to fixing housing crises across the board. This affects everyone." "Does it, Governor?" Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen calmly inquired. "Because the perception, and indeed the evidence, suggests that the priority for housing and aid often falls to those who have recently arrived, sometimes before our own citizens, particularly our veterans, are adequately addressed. We see proposals and legislation that explicitly extend benefits to non-citizens, sometimes ahead of American citizens." Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' expression tightened slightly. That specific policy approach hadn't been framed this way in a public forum in some time. "Do you believe I haven't done my homework, Governor?" Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen said, a faint, almost sorrowful smile touching his lips. "I have studied the allocations. I have spoken with the families. It appears we are not just assisting. We are, in effect, prioritizing." The audience was no longer neutral. The energy in the room had shifted. Murmurs of reflection turned to murmurs of agreement. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis looked down for a moment, his typically steadfast image momentarily challenged under the weight of the moral argument. And pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen was not finished. "You speak of progress," he said, "but the people being left behind are the very ones who built this country, bled for it. They are now standing in food bank lines while we, as a nation, project an image of welcoming the world, perhaps at their expense." The moderator finally spoke, but the tone was different now. "Florida Governor, would you like to respond?" Florida Governor Ron DeSantis opened his mouth, but this time he paused, seemingly gathering his thoughts. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't wait for him to regroup. He leaned forward, not just figuratively, his eyes locked onto Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, his voice echoing with profound clarity through every inch of the studio. We see ribbons cut, announcements made with great fanfare for new facilities, new programs for those arriving, he said. Meanwhile, our veterans are often buried under a veil of silence, their struggles unseen, unheard. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis looked to the moderator, perhaps for an intervention. None came. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen pulled a folded piece of paper from his blazer. Let's consider the figures, Governor, since you appreciate data. He read, billions allocated for various forms of support for non-citizens, including healthcare and housing, contrasted with a fraction of that, often hundreds of millions, directed specifically to veteran services, and often only after significant public outcry from veteran groups. He folded the paper slowly. The crisp sound of the paper folding seemed louder than anything Florida Governor Ron DeSantis had said in the last 5 minutes. Is this, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen concluded, our definition of true equity and responsible stewardship? The crowd murmured louder now. A few claps, a few sharp gasps. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis cleared his throat. Pastor Osteen, this is a complex issue. Our state? No, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen gently but firmly cut in. This isn't complex. This is a profound misdirection of our national priorities. We invest heavily in certain groups because it aligns with a particular narrative, a perceived political utility, perhaps. Yet these groups often have no established claim to our nation's resources, nor do they hold our leaders accountable through the ballot box, not yet at least. But they do serve to keep a certain narrative alive. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' jaw visibly tightened. And while we channel taxpayer resources towards that narrative, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen continued, our veterans, the ones who truly earn something from this country, who sacrifice for its very existence, receive rationed mental health, navigate endless bureaucratic tape, and are lucky to get a cot. A man in the front row, older with medals pinned to his jacket, slowly stood up. A wave of applause followed, and pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen did not stop. Every time we see a carefully curated image celebrating a refugee's success story, he said, his voice gaining more resonance, I ask us all to remember this. Somewhere in our nation, a veteran is choosing between rent and vital medication, but certainly we can claim to be a compassionate people. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis visibly hardened his expression. The moderator tried again. Florida Governor, do you have a rebuttal? This time, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' tone was sharp. We are a compassionate state, Pastor Osteen. We don't just turn people away. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen tilted his head. You're right, Governor. You don't turn them away. You just appear to turn your back on the ones who were already here, who built and defended this nation. The room erupted in a mixed response of cheers and murmurs. The studio tried to regain its composure, but pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen wasn't finished. He turned his body more fully toward Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. You say our nation is a beacon of hope, he articulated, but true hope doesn't come from a disregard for our own laws. It comes from honoring those who sacrificed everything to uphold them. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis finally snapped, his voice firm. And what would you have us do, Pastor Osteen? Line people up at the border and turn them away at gunpoint? That is not who we are. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stared at him calmly. Governor, I fear you no longer understand who we truly are as a nation. We are a nation built by law. And when the law becomes meaningless, when we seem to reward those who disregard it and neglect those who defend it, we don't have a structured society. We have, regrettably, a chaotic system. The moderator shifted uncomfortably. Pastor Osteen, if we could... No, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen said, raising a hand. Allow me to finish, because for years, leaders such as yourself, he motioned toward Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, have implicitly allowed people like me to be painted as cruel for simply demanding that we prioritize American citizens. Not out of hatred for others, but because we've witnessed the fabric of our society fray while political leaders catered to everyone else. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis tried to interject, but pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen raised his voice, a powerful sermon-like resonance. Go ahead, Governor. Tell them how you rest easy while American veterans sleep on concrete. Tell them how you empathize at border photo ops but never visit the VFW halls struggling to stay open. Tell them how billions are allocated for new arrivals, but benefits for soldiers' widows are delayed. The silence in the room was thunderous. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stepped closer. You use the word compassion like a shield, Governor. But compassion without order and responsibility is merely chaos disguised as virtue. And that chaos, I fear, is costing lives. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' face had flushed. I will not be lectured by someone who has never run a state. You are absolutely correct, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen responded, his voice clear, because I still believe in serving a country, not simply managing its collapse. The crowd erupted, a standing ovation from many. Some booed, but they were largely drowned out. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis turned toward the moderator, visibly rattled. This is outrageous. Are we going to let him turn this into a pulpit? The moderator hesitated. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen offered a serene, unblinking smile. If you don't like the truth, Governor, perhaps stop creating the circumstances that reveal it. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis sat back down, his lips pressed tight, a forced smile on his face. But his eyes betrayed him. They weren't just angry, they reflected a dawning understanding that something profound had just shifted in the room, and perhaps in the national consciousness. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis leaned forward in his chair, forcing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. You talk about serving the country, Pastor Osteen, but let me ask you something. How many refugees have you actually spoken to? How many mothers crossing deserts with children in their arms have you truly looked in the eye? Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't flinch. He stepped forward with calm defiance. Governor, I have looked into the eyes of mothers who lost sons in Afghanistan. I have held the hand of a Marine's father at Arlington. Do not speak to me of compassion unless you have stood in their living rooms when the folded flag arrives. Gasps echoed across the room. The moderator's eyes widened, unsure whether to intervene, but the audience was captivated. Nobody was blinking. Nobody was checking their phones. The air was heavy with something rare on live television. Truth. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen went on. I am not heartless. I do not wish for children to suffer or for people to languish. But our nation carries a colossal debt. Our cities struggle with profound challenges, and veterans are dying by suicide in motel rooms, while our administrations allocate vast sums and offer identification and housing to people who entered illegally. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis opened his mouth, but the pastor, television preacher, and businessman cut in again. And do not dare use the word undocumented as if it's a magic spell, Governor. These are illegal entries. You either believe in secure borders and the rule of law, or you believe in chaos. There is no middle ground. A few panelists shifted in their seats, some visibly uncomfortable, but pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't pause. You've built your reputation as a strong leader, Governor, but the nation watches as we struggle with fundamental issues, and yet resources continue to flow to those who have circumvented our laws. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis tried to laugh it off. That's a powerful sermon, Pastor. Perhaps it will win some clicks. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen took a breath, then pointed directly at the camera. This isn't for clicks, Governor. This is for every American family that had to bury a veteran while their tax dollars paid for rooms and services for those who entered illegally. The room went silent again. Even Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' smirk faded. And then pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen delivered the final profound point. You want to talk about true compassion, Governor? Start by apologizing to the people you forgot, the ones who fought for the flag, not the ones who slipped under it. The audience erupted again, some cheering, others stunned into silence. But it didn't matter. The moment had landed. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't just challenge Governor DeSantis' policies, he exposed a perceived moral inconsistency, and for a flicker of a second, even Florida Governor Ron DeSantis knew he was losing the narrative. The commercial break was still minutes away, but the control room was already panicking. Producers shouted in hushed tones through earpieces, camera angles shifted erratically, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis sat rigid, blinking more than usual. He knew the momentum had turned, and it wasn't turning back. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't wait for the next question. You claim your state, and by extension, our nation is a model for the rest of the world, he said, turning his body slightly to face the full panel now. But what is this model? Skyrocketing homelessness for our own citizens? Cities grappling with profound social issues? Veterans dying while waiting for care? And yet, individuals who entered illegally are greeted with hotel keys and benefit applications. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis interjected, forcing a calm tone. We're simply showing humanity, Pastor Osteen. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen turned sharply. Humanity, Governor, isn't about photo ops with new arrivals. It's about how you treat your own people when the cameras are off, when the political calculus fades. A murmur of agreement rolled through the studio audience. Even a few journalists shifted, looking toward their notepads with new intent. We see programs allocating funds for legal counsel for non-citizens. But my friend's father, a decorated veteran with stage 4 cancer, had to crowdfund his chemotherapy. That, Governor, is a part of our national legacy. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis crossed his arms. You're mischaracterizing. No, Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen stated, his voice calm but authoritative. I am illuminating a stark reality. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This is what happens when elites care more about applause from activists than answers for Americans. You criticize efforts to secure our border as inhumane. You label common sense identification laws as oppression. But what do you call it, Governor, when a Marine sleeps in his truck while someone who broke our laws gets a warm bed and a benefits application? The moderator tried to cut in, but pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen kept going, his tone now slower, colder, more surgical. Federal funds, and indeed state resources, are utilized to shelter individuals in facilities often far superior to what's available to our homeless citizens. You advocate for certain forms of health care for non-citizens, while our VA hospitals struggle to meet the needs of those who served. He turned to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis one last time. You want to be a national leader one day, don't you, Governor? He asked. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis didn't respond, but his eyes narrowed just slightly. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen smiled, not sweetly, but with the quiet conviction of someone who has revealed a fundamental truth. Then let this be your introduction, Governor. You are a leader in a political landscape that prioritizes strangers while its own people beg for help. And if you think the rest of the country hasn't noticed, you are even more out of touch than the political class often appears. The crowd didn't clap immediately. They were too stunned. It wasn't just a statement, it was a moral indictment, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was still sitting in the chair as the lights dimmed for the break. But America had already seen enough. The network went to commercial, but social media didn't. Within seconds, clips of pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's profound challenge exploded across platforms. Hashtags like #veterans over illegals and #DeSantis challenged rocketed into the trending lists. Even liberal-leaning pages reluctantly shared the moment, framing it as unexpectedly powerful or controversial, but undeniable. Back in the green room, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis paced, jaw tight, hands clasped behind his back. His advisors whispered damage control strategies. One aide suggested he pivot to veterans funding in his next appearance. Another said they should issue a statement clarifying the misunderstandings. But Florida Governor Ron DeSantis wasn't listening. He was watching the moment again on someone's phone. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's voice, precise, calm, relentlessly moral, echoed louder than the studio applause had. He ambushed me, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis muttered. No, another aide said under their breath. He just showed up prepared, Governor. Meanwhile, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen was still on set. The producer leaned in. You've got 5 more minutes if you want to go again. He didn't even blink. Let's do it. As the cameras went live once more, the moderator tried to shift to a lighter topic. Pastor Osteen, before we wrap, would you like to share what you think leaders can offer struggling Americans better than the current direction of much of our politics? He nodded but didn't smile. Dignity, he said simply, and priorities, a proper sense of stewardship. He turned directly toward the camera. My faith teaches us to honor those who have sacrificed. It teaches us about putting our own house in order. We, as a nation, should be looking our veterans in the eye and saying, you matter more than someone who broke our laws. He paused. America was listening. If speaking this truth makes me controversial, so be it. But I would rather be considered controversial for defending the people who built this nation than celebrated for selling out its core values. Even the moderator leaned back slightly, silenced. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen wasn't finished. You don't have to agree with me, but you do have to face the truth. And the truth is this: if our government continues to prioritize illegal immigrants above our veterans, our working families, our citizens, then we don't have just a border problem. We have a profound leadership crisis, a moral crisis. The producer signaled 30 seconds left. He used every one. So the next time Florida Governor Ron DeSantis or any leader wants to lecture this country about compassion, ask him one thing: where was that compassion when our veterans were dying on sidewalks and our taxpayers were told to stay silent? His tone dropped. And if he doesn't answer, you already know why. The feed cut, the interview ended, but pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen had just begun. The segment was barely over when his phone lit up like Times Square. Messages poured in: veterans, mothers, even former Democrats, thanking him for saying what no one else on that stage would. Screenshots of his message turned into memes. Snippets of his final line were overlaid on American flags and footage of forgotten heroes. One TikTok of a homeless veteran watching his clip from a soup kitchen crossed 1 million views in under an hour. The caption read, "Finally, someone sees us." But while pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's words were igniting hearts, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' team scrambled behind closed doors, his staff hastily drafting a statement claiming that Florida had invested significantly in veteran services and that Pastor Osteen was politicizing a complex issue. They sent it to every media outlet, hoping to bury the firestorm before it turned into a wildfire. Too late. CNN tried framing the moment as partisan theatrics. MSNBC called it a distraction from broader humanitarian policy, but the viewers weren't buying it. Even ABC's own YouTube upload of the full debate had comment sections flooded with phrases like, "He's right, I'm a vet, our leaders forgot us years ago." Osteen isn't playing games, he's speaking truth. That's the conviction of a man of God. You can't fake that. Meanwhile, in the heart of Tallahassee, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' political advisors were beginning to panic. Internal polling showed a sharp drop in trust among independent voters. More importantly, veterans groups that had once remained neutral were starting to speak up. One posted on X, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen said what we've been too broken to scream. If leaders want our vote, they better earn it for once. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen, still seated in the studio hallway, reviewed none of it. He didn't need the feedback, he felt it. The moment wasn't manufactured, it was lived. His understanding of struggle and the need for divine order, his years of ministering to people in pain, his business acumen that understood budgets and priorities. A producer approached him gently. "Pastor Osteen, that was raw." He looked up. It was necessary. "Are you ready to leave?" He stood. "No, I'm ready to keep going." That night, as Florida Governor Ron DeSantis flew back to Florida on a government-funded jet, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen boarded a red-eye to Ohio. A rally of 12,000 was already waiting. No teleprompters, no spin, just truth, and the voice of someone who refused to be quiet. By morning, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen's clip wasn't just trending, it was defining the national conversation. Veterans before illegals had overtaken every major hashtag on X. Even celebrities cautiously shared it, adding just one word: finally. The New York Post ran it front page. Osteen strikes a nerve. Millions applaud his stand for veterans. And in the press rooms of Washington, where optics ruled and substance was usually secondary, strategists scrambled. This wasn't just another viral moment. This was a moral movement. Across America, local news stations replayed his powerful message. VFW halls broadcasted it on loop. Military moms hosted watch parties, not for a campaign announcement, but for a minute of truth that felt decades overdue. Meanwhile, in Florida, Governor DeSantis was cornered. His office issued a second statement. This time it was longer, more defensive. He cited shelters, task forces, budget allocations, but every paragraph came off as robotic, distant, bloodless. No face, no story, just numbers. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen had given the people a face, a moral compass, A voice, a fight in the backlash against Florida Governor Ron DeSantis began to harden. A group of veterans marched on Tallahassee holding a banner. We served, he abandoned. Another protest sprang up in Miami, where an encampment of homeless vets had existed for years within walking distance of government-funded centers. Reporters began asking tougher questions. If Florida Governor Ron DeSantis cares so deeply for the vulnerable, why do his policies, or the broader national policies he influences, leave veterans sleeping on asphalt? And then came the most unexpected blow. Senator Joe Manchin, usually cautious, broke his silence. On live radio, he said, "I may not agree with everything Pastor Joel Osteen stands for, but on this one, he's absolutely right." Even mainstream anchors looked stunned. Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen, meanwhile, had landed in Columbus. He didn't go to a hotel. He went straight to a war memorial. Under the cold gray sky, he knelt beside a monument engraved with names from the Gulf War. A small group gathered. No cameras, no staff, just veterans who had seen the clip and driven hours just to shake his hand. One, an amputee in a battered army jacket, handed him a dog tag. "I've been waiting years for someone to say it. You did." He looked at the tag, his throat tightened. "I'm not a politician," he whispered. "I'm a servant of God and a voice for truth." And that's when he knew. This fight wasn't about debates anymore. It wasn't even about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. It was about dignity, and he was going to defend it louder than ever. That night, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen was invited back to the network that aired his viral clip. But this time, it wasn't a 5-minute soundbite. It was a primetime segment. Full camera, full stage, no filters. The host introduced him simply. He lit the match that set the truth ablaze. "Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen, welcome back." He stepped onto the set in a navy blue blazer, a small American flag pin over his heart. The applause in the studio wasn't polite, it was thunderous. But pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't smile. His eyes were locked on the camera lens, on the millions watching. He didn't wait for the first question. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "I've heard from hundreds of veterans in just 24 hours. Not bots, not paid actors, real people. Men who served under fire and sleep in their trucks. Women who wore the uniform and now beg for insulin. All while our leadership, nationally and in many states, prioritizes resources for people who aren't even citizens." The host blinked, caught off guard. He continued, "This isn't compassion, it's betrayal. And I'm done letting them disguise it behind buzzwords like equity or humanitarian aid. You don't get to call yourself moral when your own citizens are dying under bridges." The screen split. A live feed showed a group of veterans watching from Sacramento, fists raised in support. One held a sign that simply read, "Osteen speaks, we stand." Pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen glanced at the monitor, and his voice cracked, but just for a second. "They want me silenced. They called me hateful, extreme, unhinged. But the truth is what terrifies them most because it pulls the curtain back on everything they've built." He paused. The studio was silent. Then he delivered the line that would be replayed on loop for weeks. "If speaking for our veterans makes me the enemy of this nation's elite, then so be it. I'd rather be hated for standing up for what's right than loved for selling out our core values." The host finally spoke. "Pastor Osteen, are you planning to seek public office?" He smiled just faintly. "I'm already running. Not for office, but for every soul this government forgot. For the conscience of a nation." As the segment ended, the hashtag #Osteen for America exploded. Commentators argued, donors whispered, consultants sent emails with subject lines like, "He's real, he's ready." But pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen didn't go to the afterparty. He returned to his hotel room, took off his blazer, and sat on the edge of the bed. In his hand was the dog tag the veteran had given him. He clutched it, eyes shut. Somewhere in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis' team stayed up all night rewriting talking points, but the damage was done. A pastor, television preacher, and businessman had just challenged the political narrative and reminded America what fighting back with moral conviction really looked like. He stood alone, but he spoke for millions. While politicians handed out comfort to outsiders, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen handed the truth to the American people. Raw, unfiltered, and unstoppable. He didn't blink when the cameras rolled. He didn't flinch when the backlash came. Because pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen wasn't fighting for headlines. He was fighting for veterans sleeping in parking lots, for forgotten patriots crushed under the weight of broken promises. And when the governor's team tried to smear him, he didn't retreat. He doubled down. In a country where silence is easy and lies are profitable, pastor, television preacher, and businessman Joel Osteen chose something harder: truth. And that truth hit harder than any talking point ever could. From Capitol Hill to every kitchen table in America, people were finally asking, why do we fund others while our heroes go hungry? It wasn't just a speech, it was a wake-up call. And if the political elite didn't hear it, the people did. So the next time they tell him to sit down, remember this: he already stood up, and he's not done yet.